In the vast reaches of space, where battles were fought between entire fleets of starships, there existed a simulation unlike any other. This simulation was known across the galaxy as the ultimate test of military strategy and skill. The simulation was designed to test the bravest and most brilliant commanders in the galaxy, pushing them to their limits. For years, no one had ever come close to defeating it. The alien Admiral, Zoreth, was known throughout the universe for his cunning and ruthless strategies. He had led his people to countless victories and had never once been bested. To him, this simulation was nothing more than a routine exercise, a way to prepare his forces for the real battles that lay ahead. Zoreth sat in the command room, watching the simulation unfold before him. He could see everything, from the vast fleets of ships that lined up in formation to the tactical maneuvers of the commanders within the simulation. It was a standard setup, with various factions battling for control of an important space station. The goal was simple: outsmart the enemy and seize control of the station. But something unexpected was about to happen. In the midst of the usual display of skill and strategy, a strange name appeared on the leaderboard: a human boy. Zoreth's eyes narrowed. Humans were not known for their strategic minds or their ability to lead in battle. They were often seen as a primitive species, capable of only the most basic tactics. But this boy, Tommy, had somehow found himself at the top of the leaderboard, outmaneuvering commanders with decades of experience. Zoreth leaned forward, intrigued but also suspicious. He had heard rumors about the humans, that they were more capable than they appeared. But he had dismissed these rumors as exaggerated tales. Now, this boy had managed to challenge some of the galaxy's best commanders, and Zoreth couldn't help but wonder how. He called for a detailed report on Tommy's progress. As the data flooded in, Zoreth was shocked. The boy had already defeated several of the most experienced commanders in the simulation, and he had done it with ease. The Admiral watched closely as the boy's tactics unfolded. Tommy's ships moved with a precision that was almost unnatural. He anticipated every move his opponents made and countered them with strategies that Zoreth had never seen before. The boy's decisions were flawless, his moves executed with the kind of confidence that only came with years of experience. Zoreth had never seen anything like it. How could a human, especially a child, be so skilled in warfare? Was this some kind of trick? Or was it possible that humans had hidden talents that had never been recognized by the galaxy? Zoreth's curiosity deepened. He had to know more about this boy. He ordered his officers to gather information on Tommy's background. As the data came in, Zoreth was stunned to learn that Tommy was not a military officer, nor was he some kind of secret prodigy. He was just a regular 14-year-old human. But what made Tommy different was his obsession with military simulations. He had been playing them for years, perfecting his skills, and learning everything he could about strategy and warfare. The boy's mind was sharp, too sharp for his age. He had managed to teach himself the art of war, studying the greatest battles in history and applying those lessons to the simulation. Zoreth couldn't believe what he was reading. He had assumed that humans were nothing more than a primitive species, incapable of understanding the complexities of war. But Tommy had proven him wrong. The boy's skill was undeniable. As the simulation continued, Zoreth watched in awe as Tommy's tactics grew even more sophisticated. He began to realize that Tommy was not just reacting to his opponents. He was predicting their moves, anticipating their every strategy. It was as though the boy could see into the future, knowing exactly what would happen before it did. The alien Admiral's frustration grew. He was a master strategist, known for his ability to outthink his enemies, but Tommy was making him look foolish. Every move Zoreth made was countered with a perfect response. The boy was always one step ahead. Zoreth tried to push back, ordering his fleet to launch a full-scale attack on Tommy's forces, but the boy remained calm. His ships moved with a fluidity that was almost graceful, evading every attack and striking back with devastating precision. It was as though Tommy was dancing around him, making Zoreth feel helpless in the face of such brilliance. Zorath's mind raced. How could this be? Was there something more to Tommy's abilities than just luck? It was as if the boy had an innate understanding of warfare, an instinct that went beyond any training or experience. Zorath had never been so challenged in his career. For the first time, he felt a sense of doubt creeping into his thoughts. Could humanity really be as weak as the galaxy believed? Or was there something hidden beneath the surface, something that had yet to be discovered? As the simulation entered its final stages, Zorath could see that Tommy was on the verge of winning. The boy had outsmarted him at every turn, and now it seemed inevitable that he would emerge victorious. Zorath's pride was on the line. He couldn't let this human child defeat him, not in front of his officers and commanders. His reputation, his entire career, depended on this moment. But no matter what he did, no matter how hard he pushed, Tommy's brilliance shone through. The boy had him cornered, and Zorath had no choice but to admit defeat. But even as the simulation came to an end, Zorath was not angry. Instead, he was fascinated. He had just witnessed something incredible, something that challenged everything he thought he knew about humanity. Tommy had proven that humans were not the simple, weak species that Zorath had always believed them to be. The boy had shown that even in the vastness of space, humans were capable of greatness. As the simulation ended and the results were displayed on the screen, Zorath sat back in his chair, deep in thought. He had been defeated, but he had also been enlightened. The galaxy would have to take a hard look at humanity and reconsider their place in the universe. Zorath knew that this boy, this human child, was just the beginning. The future of the galaxy had just been altered in ways that no one could yet understand. And Zorath was left wondering, if Tommy was capable of such brilliance, what would happen when humans fully realized their potential? As the simulation ended, Zorath sat silently, his mind swirling with thoughts that he couldn't shake. He had seen many battles in his life, strategies that defied expectations, maneuvers that left entire fleets in ruin. But nothing had prepared him for what he had just witnessed. A human child, a mere 14-year-old, had outplayed him at every turn. Tommy's actions had been so precise, so carefully calculated, that it was impossible to ignore the fact that he was not just lucky. He was a force to be reckoned with. Zorath's eyes scanned the data on the screen. His mind raced as he tried to piece together the mystery of Tommy's success. The boy had never been in a real battle. He had never commanded a fleet, let alone fought in a war. And yet, here he was, outthinking the best military minds in the galaxy. Zorath's reputation as a tactician had been built over decades of experience, and yet this boy, this human, had brought him to his knees. The Admiral couldn't comprehend it. How had Tommy managed to do it? The human race, in Zorath's experience, had always been seen as weak, not possessing the intellectual prowess of the more advanced species of the galaxy. Sure, humans had a history of survival against impossible odds, but never had anyone imagined they could match the intellect of a true strategist. Zorath leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he scrolled through the reports on the human boy. Tommy had been involved in these simulations for years, starting when he was just a child. Zorath had assumed this would simply be a passing hobby, something to occupy the young mind. But the boy had taken it further than anyone could have anticipated. Zorath read through Tommy's history with intense focus. He found that the boy had been fascinated by war simulations from a young age, devoting hours upon hours to studying the tactics of great military minds. Tommy wasn't just playing for fun. He was learning, adapting, and growing. Over time, he had become an expert in the art of war, not through formal education or training, but through his own relentless pursuit of knowledge. Zorath found himself both amazed and bewildered. A human child, learning the art of warfare, outwitting experienced commanders. How was this possible? The more Zorath learned about Tommy, the more he realized that the boy's mind worked in ways that defied everything Zorath knew about humans. Tommy didn't just react to what his opponents did. He anticipated it. He understood the underlying principles of strategy, something that even seasoned commanders often fail to do. His decisions were based on patterns and probabilities, but they also seemed to tap into something deeper, an instinctive understanding of the battlefield that Zorath had never seen before. For the first time, Zorath began to question his assumptions about humanity. Had he been wrong to dismiss them as a primitive race? Could it be that humans were capable of more than just survival? Could they actually rival the more advanced species of the galaxy in intellect and strategy? Zorath had always believed that the strength of a species lay in their ability to adapt and overcome obstacles. He had thought that the galaxy's more powerful species, those with superior technology, advanced minds, and centuries of experience, were the only ones capable of true greatness. But Tommy had shown him that there was another way. The boy's ability to learn, to adapt, and to think beyond conventional strategies suggested that humanity possessed a hidden potential, one that had not yet been fully realized. The realization struck Zorath like a blow. He had underestimated humans, and now it was too late to take it back. He knew that if he did not act quickly, humanity's potential could change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. He had to understand Tommy's abilities, to learn why a human could be so different from the rest. Was Tommy simply an anomaly, a one-in-a-million case, or was this the beginning of something much bigger? Zorath knew he needed to find out. He began to focus all his attention on the boy, determined to learn everything he could. He had to understand how Tommy's mind worked, how he could predict every move before it happened. There was only one way to do that. He would have to face Tommy in the simulation again. As the next round of the simulation began, Zorath prepared himself. He was no longer just a spectator. He was a player. He had to outsmart Tommy, to prove that the boy's success was nothing more than a lucky streak. But as the simulation unfolded, Zorath found that once again he was on the back foot. Tommy's moves were precise, and Zorath's fleet, no matter how much he tried to counter the boy's strategies, was falling apart. Zorath's frustration grew. This time, he wasn't going to make the same mistake. He focused all his efforts, every ounce of his tactical brilliance, on this one goal: defeat Tommy. But the more he fought, the more he realized that Tommy wasn't simply playing a game. The boy was thinking on a level that Zorath couldn't match. Tommy wasn't just reacting to Zorath's moves. He was anticipating them, calculating each possible outcome, and acting accordingly. Zorath's heart raced. The boy was playing a game of chess, and Zorath was stuck playing checkers. For the first time in his career, Zorath found himself doubting his own skills. He was a master of strategy, a brilliant tactician who had won countless battles. And yet, here he was, being bested by a child. Zorath's pride, his reputation, were on the line. He couldn't let this happen again. But no matter how hard he tried, no matter how much he pushed, Tommy was always one step ahead. As the simulation drew to a close, Zorath's mind raced. What was he missing? How had Tommy learned to think like this? Was it possible that the human race had capabilities far beyond what the galaxy had realized? Zorath knew that he couldn't simply dismiss Tommy's abilities as a fluke. There was something more at play here. The galaxy had always underestimated humans. They had thought of them as weak, as no match for the more powerful species of the universe. But Tommy had shown them all that humans were capable of more than anyone had ever imagined. Zorath sat in silence, watching as the results of the simulation flashed across the screen. Once again, Tommy had won. This time, however, Zorath didn't feel anger or frustration. Instead, he felt a sense of awe. He had just witnessed something that had the potential to change everything. Humans were not as weak as the galaxy had believed. In fact, they had the potential to be far more dangerous than anyone could have anticipated. Zorath sat back, deep in thought. The future of the galaxy was shifting, and for the first time, he wasn't sure where humanity would stand in it. As Zorath sat back, staring at the results of the simulation, his mind churned with questions. How had this human child, Tommy, managed to outthink him, and every other experienced commander. The boy's strategies were so perfect, so precise, that Zorath couldn't simply dismiss them as a fluke. It had to be more than just luck or coincidence. Tommy's ability to predict and outmaneuver the galaxy's finest was not only remarkable, it was deeply unsettling. Zorath had lived his life with one clear understanding. In the universe, strength came from knowledge, experience, and technology. The more advanced a species was, the more power they held. That was why the galaxy had always viewed humans as insignificant. They were a young species, still fighting among themselves, without the kind of sophisticated technology or military strategies that others possessed. The galaxy's leaders had always treated them as an afterthought, not worth considering on the same level as the other more advanced races. But now, Tommy's incredible skill had shattered that worldview. As the simulation ended, Zorath felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: doubt. His reputation, his entire career, had been built on his tactical brilliance. But a human child, someone with no formal training, had just beaten him at his own game. The more Zorath thought about it, the more he began to question everything he had known about the human race. Were they really as weak as everyone had assumed, or had they been hiding their true potential all along? Zorath couldn't just let it go. He needed to understand what made Tommy different. He needed to know how this human boy could be so skilled. What did Tommy know that the galaxy had missed? To find the answers, Zorath decided to dig deeper into Tommy's past. He ordered his officers to gather as much information as possible about the boy, his history, his education, his family. Zorath knew he would find something. There had to be an explanation for Tommy's extraordinary abilities. The more Zorath learned about Tommy, the more intrigued he became. Tommy was not a military prodigy, not a genius born into an elite family. He was just a regular boy, living on a small, relatively insignificant human colony. But what set Tommy apart was his obsession with war games. He had been playing simulations since he was very young, spending hours upon hours studying the strategies of famous commanders from history. Tommy wasn't just playing for fun. He was learning, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. His parents had encouraged his interest, but no one had realized just how deep his passion ran. Zorath learned that Tommy had taken part in countless simulations, pushing himself to constantly improve. He studied battle tactics from every era, studying the greatest leaders in human history: Napoleon, Alexander the Great, Sun Tzu. Tommy had studied their strategies, analyzed their moves, and applied them to his own gameplay. Zorath realized that this was more than just a hobby for Tommy. It was his life's work. The boy had mastered the art of war, not through formal education, but through sheer determination and hours of practice. Tommy's mind was sharp, far sharper than Zorath had anticipated. The boy had developed an intuitive understanding of tactics, one that allowed him to see the battlefield in ways that even the most seasoned commanders could not. But there was something even more intriguing that Zorath uncovered. Tommy had not only learned the lessons of past battles, he had applied them to modern warfare in ways that were truly revolutionary. He had learned how to think like his enemies, anticipating their moves before they made them. His ability to predict every possible scenario was uncanny. It was as if he could read the future, predicting what his opponents would do before they did it. Zorath knew this was no ordinary skill. This was a kind of genius that transcended anything he had ever encountered. The more Zorath dug, the more he realized that Tommy wasn't just a master of tactics. He had developed something more, a natural instinct for war. It wasn't just about studying past battles or learning from history. Tommy had an innate ability to understand the deeper principles of strategy, the patterns that underlay every conflict. It was as if he could see the game being played on a much deeper level, beyond the surface of the battlefield. This instinct was what made Tommy so dangerous. Zorath couldn't help but feel a growing sense of respect for the boy. Tommy had proven that the human mind was capable of far more than anyone had ever given them credit for. For the first time, Zorath wondered if humanity had been underestimated all along. Was it possible that humans had an untapped potential, a brilliance that had yet to be fully realized by the galaxy. As Zorath continued to analyze Tommy's performance, he realized that the boy's abilities weren't just limited to the simulations. Tommy had shown an extraordinary understanding of strategy and tactics, but he had also demonstrated something else, something that Zorath had never seen in any other species. Tommy had the ability to adapt on the fly, to think quickly and adjust his plans as the situation changed. This flexibility was what made him so unpredictable, so hard to counter. The boy wasn't just playing the game. He was constantly evolving, always one step ahead. Zorath realized that he had to meet Tommy again, not just to challenge him, but to understand him. He needed to see if Tommy's abilities were a one-time fluke, or if they represented something much bigger. Zorath knew that the future of the galaxy might depend on the answer to that question. If humans had the kind of tactical brilliance Tommy had displayed, then they could be a powerful force in the galaxy, perhaps even more powerful than the current leaders realized. But Zorath also knew that Tommy's skills were not just a threat to him personally. If humans could harness their potential, if they could train more like Tommy, then they would no longer be the insignificant species they were thought to be. The galaxy's power balance could shift, and Zorath wasn't sure if he was ready for that. Determined to face Tommy again, Zorath prepared himself for the next round of the simulation. This time, he would not underestimate the human boy. This time, Zorath would fight with everything he had, using every bit of his strategic genius to defeat Tommy. But deep down, Zorath knew that it wouldn't be easy. The boy had shown him something far more important than just a victory in a simulation. He had shown Zorath that the human race had hidden depths that, if unleashed, could change the galaxy forever. And that thought, more than anything, made Zorath feel a sense of both excitement and dread. Zorath's preparation for the next simulation was meticulous. He studied Tommy's every move, analyzing the boy's strategies in a way he had never done before. The alien Admiral, known throughout the galaxy for his superior intellect and unmatched tactical skills, was now faced with an entirely new challenge. The boy Tommy had forced Zorath to rethink everything he knew about warfare. What had once seemed like a mere simulation now felt like a battleground for the future of the galaxy. Zorath was no longer just trying to beat Tommy. He was trying to understand him, to learn the secrets behind Tommy's unparalleled abilities. How could a human, someone from a species that had never known true interstellar war, possess such natural brilliance in the art of strategy? It was as if Tommy had tapped into some kind of universal understanding of conflict, one that Zorath himself could not quite grasp. Every move Tommy made in the simulation seemed to predict Zorath's own with eerie accuracy, as though the boy had an innate understanding of Zorath's tactics before they even happened. The days leading up to the simulation were filled with intense study. Zorath pored over every piece of data, every recorded battle, every simulation in which Tommy had participated. He watched Tommy's previous matches with a kind of obsessive focus, analyzing each decision the boy made, no matter how small. Zorath began to notice patterns in Tommy's playstyle. It wasn't just that Tommy anticipated his moves. It was that he understood the very nature of battle itself. The boy's tactics weren't just reactions. They were carefully crafted plans that left no room for error. Zorath began to realize that Tommy's brilliance lay not only in his intelligence, but also in his ability to think several steps ahead. He could see the entire battlefield, not just in terms of position, but in terms of possibilities. There was something almost prophetic about Tommy's gameplay. It was as though the boy could see the future, or at least 100 different versions of it. Zorath realized that he was no longer just competing with a child. He was up against someone who seemed to have an uncanny ability to predict what would happen next, no matter how complex the situation. Zorath's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of the next simulation. He sat down at his command station, his eyes fixed on the virtual battlefield that lay before him. He could already feel the weight of the challenge ahead. Tommy was waiting, just as eager as Zorath was to begin. The simulation began, and immediately, Zorath went on the offensive. He had studied Tommy's tactics, and this time, He was determined not to be caught off guard. His fleet moved with deadly precision, each ship coordinated in a flawless assault. Zorath thought he had the upper hand, but as the simulation unfolded, it quickly became apparent that Tommy was, once again, one step ahead. Zorath's ships engaged Tommy's forces, but the boy's movements were smooth and calculated, as if he had already anticipated Zorath's every action. Tommy's ships darted and weaved around the alien fleet, taking advantage of every opening Zorath left behind. Every counterattack Zorath launched was met with a response that caught him off guard. Tommy wasn't just reacting to the battle, he was directing it, leading the flow of combat with an almost unnatural ease. Zorath gritted his teeth, frustration building. He could feel himself being outplayed at every turn, unable to keep up with Tommy's flawless tactics. Every time Zorath thought he had the upper hand, Tommy would find a way to turn the tables, shifting the momentum in his favor. The boy's ships seemed to appear exactly where they needed to be, always in the perfect position to strike. Zorath's every move felt sluggish and predictable in comparison. As the battle raged on, Zorath's frustration grew. His mind raced, trying to come up with a new strategy, something that would catch Tommy off guard. But it was no use. No matter what he did, Tommy anticipated his moves with terrifying accuracy. The boy's brilliance was becoming more and more apparent with each passing minute, and Zorath couldn't help but wonder, was there any way to defeat him? Zorath realized that he couldn't keep playing the same way. He had to do something different, something unexpected. He had to break the pattern, find a way to throw Tommy off balance. Zorath decided to take a risk. He ordered his fleet to execute a tactic he had never used before, one that was dangerous but could potentially work if done correctly. It was a gamble, but Zorath had nothing left to lose. For a brief moment, Tommy hesitated. Zorath saw a flicker of uncertainty in the boy's actions, and for the first time, he felt like he had gained a slight advantage. But just as quickly as it appeared, Tommy regained control, adapting his strategy to the new situation. Zorath's gambit had failed. Tommy had already accounted for it. Zorath's heart pounded in his chest. He was running out of options. Tommy's strategy was too fluid, too dynamic to be countered. It was as if the boy was playing a different game altogether, one that Zorath couldn't even begin to understand. With the final moments of the simulation approaching, Zorath knew he was defeated. Tommy had outmaneuvered him once again. Zorath's fleet was falling apart, his forces scattered and disorganized, unable to keep up with the boy's relentless precision. In the end, it wasn't just that Tommy was good. He was better than Zorath had ever anticipated. The simulation ended with Tommy's victory, and once again, Zorath was left with nothing but the cold, bitter taste of defeat. But this time, it felt different. Zorath didn't feel the anger he had felt after their first battle. This time, there was a sense of awe mixed with his frustration. He had just faced the greatest strategist he had ever encountered. And that strategist was human. Zorath sat back in his chair, staring at the results of the simulation. For the first time in his life, he found himself questioning everything he had once believed. The human race, once thought to be weak and insignificant, had shown that they were capable of greatness. Tommy had proven that humans were not just survivors. They were innovators, thinkers, and strategists. They had the potential to be far more than anyone had ever imagined. Zorath realized that the galaxy would have to change. The balance of power would shift, whether anyone was ready for it or not. And as he sat there, contemplating the future, Zorath knew one thing for certain. He would never underestimate humanity again. The boy, Tommy, had proven that humanity was a force to be reckoned with, and Zorath could no longer ignore the fact that the future of the galaxy might just belong to them. Zorath's thoughts lingered long after the simulation had ended. Tommy's victory was a stark reminder of the incredible potential humanity possessed, potential that had been long underestimated by the rest of the galaxy. It had become clear to the alien Admiral that something had shifted, something significant, and that humanity was no longer the weak, insignificant species it had once been seen as. The universe was changing, and Tommy's brilliant strategies were a testament to that change. For days, Zorath remained in his command room, reflecting on what had transpired. The results of the simulations were more than just data points. They were a warning. In the face of Tommy's overwhelming intellect, the galaxy's existing power structures were beginning to feel fragile. Zorath had been a part of the old guard, the ones who believed that intelligence alone was not enough to win wars. Power, military strength, and advanced technology were the true keys to dominance. But now he was forced to admit that there was more to warfare than technology alone. As Zorath sat alone, contemplating this new reality, he found himself unsettled by the depth of Tommy's strategic genius. How had a human boy, with no formal training, learned to see the world in a way that outpaced the galaxy's best minds? Tommy's every move, every tactic, had been a step ahead, as if he was seeing the future unfold before it even happened. Zorath knew that the boy had done more than study the classics of military strategy. He had internalized them, made them his own, and combined them with an intuitive understanding that went beyond simple logic. The more Zorath thought about it, the more he realized that the boy's brilliance wasn't just in his ability to predict movements or outthink his opponents. Tommy had shown something deeper, a connection to the nature of war itself. The human mind, it seemed, had an unrecognized ability to adapt, to grow and innovate when faced with adversity. The boy was proof of that. And if Tommy's abilities were any indication, there was an entire generation of humans out there who could be just as capable, just as brilliant. Zorath knew that humanity's growing tactical prowess would not be ignored for long. The galaxy's leaders would soon realize that the human race was a threat to the established order. The balance of power could not remain unchanged once more humans like Tommy began to rise. Zorath couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The universe had been on the brink of war for years, but now, humanity had entered the fray in a way no one had anticipated. Their potential could very well be the spark that ignited the flames of galactic conflict. Zorath's mind raced, and he began to wonder how he could prepare for the coming storm. Would he be part of the old guard, clinging to outdated methods, or would he find a way to adapt? The galaxy's leadership had always relied on sheer power, on technological superiority, but now they had to contend with a species capable of adapting and learning at an unprecedented rate. The question that lingered in Zorath's mind was no longer about winning a simulation against a human child. It was about surviving a future where humans were no longer to be underestimated. Meanwhile, Tommy was unaware of the deep shift that had occurred in Zorath's mind. He continued with his studies, practicing in the simulation, unaware that his skills had drawn the attention of one of the most powerful military minds in the galaxy. To Tommy, it was just another challenge, just another game to play. But he couldn't have known that his victory would have consequences far beyond the screen. Tommy's victory had been more than just an isolated incident. It had sent ripples through the galaxy, challenging the very foundations of how the universe viewed humanity. He had become an unwitting symbol of the future, a future where humans could no longer be ignored. For Zorath, and for others in the galaxy's power structure, Tommy's skills were no longer just the talent of one exceptional child. They were a sign of what was to come. Back on Earth, Tommy went on living his life, but his victories in the simulation had begun to spark curiosity among other humans. There was a growing interest in the idea that humans might possess the kind of intellectual capacity that had been previously attributed to only the most advanced species. Tommy's story began to spread, first among his peers, and then across the globe. People began to ask, could it be possible that humanity had been holding itself back all along? Zorath, meanwhile, had no intention of waiting for the galaxy to realize humanity's potential. He had already begun to plan. His next step was to reach out to Tommy directly, not just as a challenge, but as an opportunity to better understand what the boy could do. Zorath had seen something in Tommy's abilities that was too valuable to ignore. In the world of war and power, knowledge was the greatest asset, and Zorath was determined to learn more about this human prodigy. But what Zorath didn't yet realize was that Tommy's talents were part of something much bigger, a growing movement among humans, a shift in their very approach to life and conflict. Tommy might have been the first to capture Zorath's attention, but he was not the last. Humanity's potential was limitless, and soon, others like Tommy would rise to meet the challenges of the galaxy. As Zorath prepared to reach out to Tommy, he knew that his next steps would be critical. He could not afford to let the human boy's abilities go unchecked. But more than that, Zorath knew that the future of the galaxy was on the verge of a dramatic shift. The old ways, the old strategies would no longer suffice. The universe would have to come to terms with the fact that humanity, the species once dismissed as weak and insignificant, was now a force to be reckoned with. Zorath leaned back in his chair, looking out at the vast expanse of space before him. For the first time in years, he felt uncertain. The galaxy had always been predictable, until now. The rise of humanity had changed everything. The only question now was how the galaxy would respond, and whether Zorath, once the ultimate strategist, would be able to adapt to the new world Tommy and his kind were shaping.